The story you're about to hear should have already ricocheted across the games industry this year and cemented itself as one of the very worst scandals in its history. And I think that's exactly what would have happened had the people involved lived and worked in California or in Paris or in Tokyo rather than in Jakarta. Instead, outside of Southeast Asia, it's like nothing has even happened. Today we're going to try and do our best to remedy that, but first I need to provide you with this significant list of content warnings and just say to you that the stories you're going to hear today are at times really unpleasant, but the reason we're sharing them is because the people involved want as many of you to see and hear what they went through as possible. In early September, I was sent video footage of an Indonesian game artist called Christa slapping herself across the face 100 times. With her permission, I'm going to play a very short section of that video here, and I obviously need to warn you that it's distressing to watch. Now, the reason I was sent that footage was because back in 2021, I'd actually spoken to Christa about her job and her relationship with her employers for a story I was working on about outsourced labour in the video games industry. She told me back then that everything was going really great, which was surprising to me because it didn't exactly line up with what I'd heard from many of her co-workers who felt exhausted and overworked. But what I didn't know until now is that Christa had been suffering in a way I could not have even imagined at the time. Because that video you just watched a very short clip from, Christa claims to have recorded that and then sent it to her boss as a punishment for not having performed well enough at work. And as extreme as that video is, it's really just the razor-sharp tip of a much larger iceberg in which Christa and some of her colleagues were subjected to years of abuse at the hands of an employer who was able to control and manipulate almost every aspect of their lives.
For the whole week, I wasn't allowed to sleep.
For me at the time, it was scary, lonely.
She wanted me to take a picture of the blood in my mouth.
She was don't look at her. You have to be strong. Don't show your empathy towards her. It was really scary.
The wooden frame of the door, I had to hit my head as hard as possible. I had concussion symptoms.
But before we can begin to understand all of that, let me very quickly get you up to speed with that first story I reported that had led me to speaking to Christa 4 years ago. So, back in 2021, People Make Games published a video titled How Game Publishers Buy Crunch Overseas. We'd wanted to investigate a part of game development that typically gets very, very little attention from the media. And so we told the story of two game studios which most of our audience had never heard of before, despite their contributions to games like The Last of Us, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Gears of War 4, and Warcraft 3 Reforged. And that's because these two companies, Lemon Sky Studios based in Malaysia and Brandoville Studios based in Indonesia, are what people in the business of making games call external developers, or maybe outsourcers. This means they get hired by clients like Naughty Dog or the Coalition or whoever it may be to create, in this case, art assets that will be then used for their games. It costs an awful lot less to hire a game artist in Kuala Lumpur than it does in, say, Vancouver, and as a result, outsourcing to lower income countries has played a huge, huge role in how games are actually made. But as our reporting uncovered, the potential for exploitation here is significant. We found that employees at each of these companies were routinely expected to work long stretches of unpaid overtime at the expense of their health. We're talking weeks straight, sometimes months, of artists sleeping in the office, working weekends, and late into the night in order to meet deadlines which simply could not be met otherwise. Here's my closing line from that video back in 2021. And at some point, if that keeps on happening, then crunch culture is no longer an unfortunate side effect of the business, it is in fact the product that's being purchased. So yeah, we published our investigation and well, not much changed really. Publicly at least, I think the most consequential thing I saw happen in its aftermath was a panel at an event called the External Developers Summit, which had been put together in direct response to our reporting. It was called Let's Talk About Crunch. And in fact, one of the bosses of the two studios, Ken Lai of Brandoville, was actually invited to take part, which was great. Although, do you know who wasn't invited? Literally anybody who could speak to the actual experiences of the actual workers doing the actual crunch that we'd just uncovered. All they really seem able to do is ask someone like Ken Lai is there much crunch happening at your company? And he's like, no, there's not.
I don't agree that developers sell the crunch to Southeast Asia. Instead, the developer is the key to bring the great value to these two countries.
And nobody challenges him on this, despite our reporting having shone the spotlight on employees who said they spent months working at that office until 3 a.m. in the morning. Or one put it quite bluntly that, and I quote, "You are not treated as human." For the next 3 years, both Lemon Sky and Brandoville Studios continued on, and the games industry continued to rely on their services in order to ship its games, without, as far as I can tell, any meaningful push to improve the working conditions of the artists doing that work. This was until just a few months ago when news broke that Brandoville had shut down, and that moment would prove to be the catalyst for its former employees to rush forward and share the true horror of what had been going on behind its doors. And at the very centre of these allegations was Christa Sydney and her story.
So I joined the company in February 2019. I applied as a concept artist but didn't pass the portfolio at the time.
Christa was instead offered a marketing position, which she accepted, but things got off to a rocky start after she'd raised her voice to the company's CEO, Ken Lai, during a disagreement over how some business cards had been printed. And given she was still on probation at the time, she presumed this incident would now see her let go from the company. But it wasn't actually Ken Lai who would make that decision. It was his wife, Cherry Lai, who ran the day-to-day operations at Brandoville, and ultimately, that decision would be up to her.
Just as she was about to announce that I was going to be kicked out, she said that God talked to her. And so she said she's going to take me under her wing and give me 2 weeks to prove myself.
Christa describes this new relationship between herself and Cherry as something resembling a mentorship, at least to begin with, anyway.
If anything, because I was in such a vulnerable position, I was very grateful that I received a second chance.
But she said this dynamic began to shift in early 2020 as Jakarta entered lockdown during the COVID pandemic, and as Christa and several of her co-workers moved into the studio itself to live there full time. It's worth quickly understanding just a little about the building where all of this is happening. Brandoville Studios was based here in central Jakarta, with most staff working either on the first or the second floor of these offices. Then on the ground floor, you've got a lobby and reception area, as you might expect, but also a set of dorm rooms, which house a select few employees who've been invited to not just work here, but live here as well. And they're not the only ones, because 3 floors above them is a bedroom belonging to Ken and Cherry Lai. Several of the employees who lived here during that period have told me that Cherry Lai developed a strict schedule for the way in which they were meant to use their time each day.
5:30 a.m. we need to wake up and then pray to God, and then 6 a.m. we need to go do our exercise, and then 8 a.m. shower, 9 a.m. be at the office, and then even what time we need to drink water. She also put it in the schedule, and then what time we eat, what time we go to bed, so that kind of thing.
That schedule also included a weekly prayer meeting, which employees told me was considered mandatory. It was also a Christian prayer meeting because Cherry Lai is Christian. But their employees weren't, not necessarily. In fact, the vast majority of Indonesians identify as Muslim, and these particular employees practiced a range of different religions at the time, but the mandatory prayer meeting they needed to attend was always Christian. Cherry's relationship with certain staff members during this period also became increasingly personal.
Slowly, Cherry started to divide us.
When Christa first moved to the studio, she shared her dorm room with another employee called Elenda, and the two of them had actually been close ever since their college days together. This was until, according to Christa and other employees I've spoken to, Cherry took an active interest in their relationship.
She started to gossip about Elenda to me, started to try to get me to be suspicious of her. She told me that, you and I, we're the same, we're popular girls, and then Elenda is more of a nerdy girl. But before that, never had like any problem with each other.
Several former employees told me that they believe Cherry intentionally meddled in the personal relationships of her staff, and that this was especially true for women.
She has like this Excel sheet, like the list of like the people she considers like her friends in her life, and number one was me. So it made me like felt special at the time.
These one-on-one conversations, however, would then feel extremely at odds with the way in which Cherry would criticize and discipline Christa and other employees during the workday.
Let's say if I make a mistake and then she will scold me publicly. Sometimes, if she really feels angry or whatever, she would just call names. Maybe like stupid, you piece of shit, you bitch, yeah, all those kind of words. And then privately, she will say something like, you know, I spoke to you publicly so people don't attack you, but actually you are fine.
When the former Brandoville employees came forwards with their stories in early September, they came with receipts. Some of these have been shared publicly online already on social media, while others have been sent to People Make Games as part of our own investigation. And as a result of that, I've now read through hundreds of messages which employees say Cherry sent to them either privately or in group chats with other staff members. And these messages show her regularly threatening to fire her employees for the smallest perceived mistakes, or using language that is just totally demeaning and inappropriate. These messages paint a picture of an easily irritated and usually erratic leader who expects and often receives complete subservience from her employees, who she in turn then micromanages to an extreme. Despite Christa often receiving the very worst of this attention, she and a few other employees were at the same time ostracized by the rest of the company because they were seen as being utterly devoted to Cherry.
All of us know that Christa is struggling. One of my friends mentioned that Christa cries several times after being scolded like this, but she still became Cherry's loyalist. She and some of the others had been brainwashed by Cherry.
They did not like me at all. If they do something wrong, I probably tell it directly to Cherry. I didn't really have much friends at that time because like most of people hate me.
This isolation was also extended to their families as well.
Yeah, so she's always like convinced me and like other people actually that you know, like family and friends, like they're just like your burden. Like if you want to succeed, like you have to basically like set them aside.
For me at the time, it was like scary, lonely. I didn't have someone to talk to. I didn't feel like I don't have any friends. I cannot trust anyone, even like probably my family.
I mentioned earlier that as part of our reporting on crunch conditions at Brandoville, I'd first contacted Christa back in 2021, where she told me, and I quote, "I know some people say this place is tough to work at, and I agree, it's a very disciplined company, which is why I think it's great, because as an artist, we tend to let bad habits like slacking off get the better of us. I love the fact that they accepted us no matter where we're from and who we are, so I'm happy to say it's also a very woman-friendly environment." Christa has since told me that in fact, this whole email exchange that we had been dictated to her by Cherry Lai. But perhaps the more surprising revelation, for me anyway, was that in the aftermath of our video having been published, Christa actually recorded her own video in defense of Brandoville Studios, which was then shared with organizations like the External Developer Summit, who she told me was threatening to blacklist Brandoville from the event going forwards because of what our reporting had uncovered. And in this video, Christa is visibly overcome with emotion about how much Brandoville means to her and how thankful she is to both Ken and Cherry Lai.
Even my family, they know how life-changing it has been for me to work here. They saw me, like, you know, my mom has seen me change. It really touches me when I saw like how much my mom supports me working here. It's something that is very special for me.
This video was later shown to other employees at Brandoville, some of whom remember feeling extremely uncomfortable as they watched it.
Even at that time where Cherry showed us that video, Christa is really proud and was tearing up too, because she was like, "Yeah, I'm doing that gladly, Mrs. Cherry," something like that. And then we're like, Okay, girl, you need help. You need help, but you don't know.
We asked a representative from XDS if they remember receiving this video, and here's a response I got from its executive director. I do remember seeing that video, but I don't believe it was sent to XDS directly. I think a colleague shared it with me at the time. And yes, I think you're right that we didn't know what was truly happening at Brandoville, which may have been the reason we gave Kenlai a platform to address the issues of crunch. I'm sorry to hear the situation has worsened, and I do think it's a good thing that you're shedding light in order to mitigate this from happening at other studios. The situation has worsened is one way to put it. I think it's worth reminding ourselves here that this was an outsourcing company for the video games industry, because I think as we need to delve into some of the more coercive and violent behaviour happening behind closed doors, it might be easy to lose sight of that. But to be clear, Brandoville Studios, since we last reported on its crunch in 2021, has contributed to games like Age of Empires 4, as well as a now cancelled sci-fi project from Deviation Games before it shut down earlier this year, and even Ubisoft's upcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows. Christa recalls a turning point being the next external developer summit that took place that year in Canada, and that she would be attending in person along with Ken, Cherry, and several colleagues.
Yeah, and she told me to keep being awake. I wasn't allowed to sleep. So for the whole week, I wasn't allowed to sleep. I had to work with her. She was really micromanaging everything. I had to work while I had a Google Meet on, and then shared my screen so she can monitor if I'm asleep or not.
Christa told me that Cherry seemed to require very little sleep herself, and sometimes she would expect the same from her employees, but this was on a whole different level. She also clarified that when she's talking about a week there, she actually means a 4-day stretch building up to the flight over to Canada, and I asked her during those 4 days how much in total she thinks she slept.
Probably a couple of minutes. I took some 5-minute breaks to the toilet. I think the first time I finally slept was on the plane.
And at the event itself, there was a problem.
So we took a group picture at XDS to send to Cherry, because she her legs were so swollen from not sleeping that she couldn't attend the event. It just so happened that I was standing in the middle of the picture, and then Kenlai was standing in the corner, and she got really mad. She told me that, oh, you stood in the middle of the picture when it's supposed to be the CEO. Basically I was bringing harm and danger to Kenlai as the CEO. So I got in a really big trouble because of that. She told me to write some sentences 100 times and then submit to her as proof.
Here is Christa reading those same sentences back today.
I am Christa Sidney. I am very sorry because I am not humble and I am lying. I gave excuses. I suck because I used lazy as my excuse today. The truth is I am greedy, selfish, and I think dirty and nasty.
Christa has also shared WhatsApp messages with People Make Games from this trip, which appear to show Cherry dictating who Christa is allowed to talk to, including whether she's allowed to speak to someone delivering takeout or to the cashier at a 7-Eleven. Other messages see Cherry writing a long, rambling screed about how Christa needs to accept God into her life, comments about Christa's parents and their marital problems, and finally, a demand that Christa should fear her and fear God in order to succeed. In the following days, Christa claims to have tried to resign from Brandoville Studios, although she says that Cherry would not allow this to happen.
I had a phone call with her late at night. I told her that I wanted to resign because I really couldn't handle it anymore. I felt I was being a burden because everything I did led to her being angry. So it really felt useless, felt I'm being a burden to basically everyone. And then she said that I'm not allowed to resign because I had a lot of debt to her.
According to Christa, Cherry had explained that this debt had been accrued over the course of her time at Brandoville, during moments in which Cherry had brought her along to expensive meals, purchased her gifts, or invited her to staycations during the pandemic.
And also the hours that she spent talking to us, even though it's basically nonsense, but she said it's basically educating us. So she said that she's invested all of this for years at that point, 3 years going on. She said I still have to repay my debt. So I wasn't allowed to resign.
After returning from this trip, the abuse Christa would receive reached a totally new extreme.
Imagine like this is Cherry and here is Christa. She'll told Christa like, "Oh, you ugly fat pig, step back." So she have to move back and hide herself because Cherry doesn't want to see Christa. And then after that, she was like, move again. So she started like, okay, and then keep. And then even though she was treated that way, Christa still has to put smile on her face.
Cherry said that if she asked Christa to eat a dead rat, Christa will do it. And I was like, I'm sorry, a dead rat?
She kept like commenting on my weight specifically, like in front of like everyone. Like she would say like, oh, Chris is like ugly and fat. If like she keeps like being like ugly and fat, like she would get fired.
During a period in which Christa and two other members of the marketing team were working from the front desks of Brandoville Studios and another building elsewhere in the city, Christa's appearance was being heavily micromanaged by Cherry. In the next clip, you're going to hear Christa use the term QC, as in quality control, which is something you might usually expect to hear when describing feedback on, for example, marketing assets that you're working on and not the clothes you're wearing on your body.
We need to every morning take a picture like of our like full body, like neck down, show her like our outfit that day, and then she would like QC it. She would tell us like if we look like fat or like our clothing is like professional or not. And then like she would comment like my body like needs like more diet, that kind of thing.
It was also in this later period that Cherry's punishments for Christa became more and more physical. While Christa has told me that much of this happened privately, some did also take place in public. For example, one meeting in early 2023 saw Christa being humiliated as some kind of lesson for the few other Brandoville employees in attendance.
She told Christa to kneel down, her arms straight up. She will like told us like, don't look at her, you have to be strong, don't show your empathy towards her, something like that. It was really scary. How can I not feel sorry if I see someone treated that way?
She doesn't know the word kneel, so every time like she would say like bow down, and then like I would like bow, but then like she get like angry because I didn't understand like what she was saying, and then I had to like kneel. She told like a couple of people to go inside the room and like see me like kneeling for hours.
In private, things were getting much worse. Christa said that to begin with, Cherry would ask her to slap her own face lightly like this in order to wake herself up if she looked lethargic or if she'd made a small mistake. But soon, this would no longer be enough, and she would ask her to do it harder and harder.
The earliest record that I have was like a recording of me hitting myself like in the mouth until like I bled, and then she wanted me to take a picture of like the blood in my mouth.
The most extreme version of this, you've already seen some of. It's the video in which Christa hits herself as hard as she can across her face 100 times. Now, I've seen that full video, I've counted each slap as it lands, and the thing that has stuck with me the most, other than the sheer violence of it, is the expression on Christa's face throughout. It's the same Christa that I've spoken to, but also it's not. It's like she's on autopilot, it's like she's not really even there. Christa claims that in most cases she was asked to slap herself in private or over a video call, but in this case, because it was a recording that she then needed to send to Cherry, we actually have a screenshot of the chat log when that footage was sent. It reads, "Hi Mrs. Cherry, noted, will do. I would like to report that I have slapped myself 100 times and on my way to Brandoville Studios. Thank you." Cherry replies, "I don't believe. How to prove?" 3 minutes later, Christa sends the video to Cherry, who then replies, "Did I ask you, send me? You can't directly without asked. Impolite." Impolite, that's the word she chooses to use in this moment, having just, presumably, watched her employee do that to herself. I can't get over the coldness of that, the slightly disinterested, irritated callousness of it. Impolite. I asked Christa how many other people at Brandoville Studios at the time knew that this was happening to her.
So throughout like 2023, I believe like no one else like knew, because like it happened like either I was already like in my rented place, and then like she called me and then like she told me to like slap myself, or it happens like when I'm meeting her like late at night at the office, just like the two of us.
Christa told me that she believes Ken Lai, Cherry's partner and the CEO of the company, was also unaware of this physical side of the abuse. She said when it came to the rest that he saw some of it happen and seemed to feel uncomfortable about it, but most of the time these things would happen when he just wasn't in the room. There's also another video, this time recorded by Cherry Lai herself, in which she's berating a visibly confused and dazed looking Christa outside a room on the 3rd floor of Brandoville Studios. I'm gonna play a bit of that video for you now. We're gonna include some subtitles that we've written, and then Christa is going to explain in her own words what she claims has just happened to her.
I'm very sorry.
You lie, you say sorry to me for what? You lie, then you need to tell the truth. What is the truth? What's the truth?
She told me to hit my head against the wall. So it was like the wooden frame of the door. Like I had to like hit my head like as hard as possible. I thought like she was like joking, right? But no, like she wanted me to like hit as hard as possible until like I had like concussion like symptoms. And in that video, like when she was berating me, I was already like delirious because of like the impact. And then I had like my vision became like all white for like a couple of seconds. And then like my ears rang, and then I had like a migraine. And basically like I was like really like out of it. And then she tried to like gaslight me into thinking that I was like a liar because I didn't like remember, because like, well, I just hit my head.
We also need to take a moment to talk about financial abuse here, because there are at least 2 examples of which we've been told about. We're going to start with one of Christa's co-workers first, Caesar. He told us that each month he sent a large portion of his salary to Cherry Lai in order for her to help him control his spending habits.
Like he knows like I like to buy stuff and my money management wasn't good. So I was like, okay, like I trust her.
Caesar told me that he was left with just enough to cover his essential needs each month, but if he then wanted to make an additional purchase, something that was considered a luxury, he would then need to ask Cherry's permission as to whether or not he could do that, and it was up to her to decide whether or not that purchase should be made. I asked Caesar how often Cherry would say yes in these moments compared to no.
Mostly no. From that moment, like I didn't buy anything much, basically.
What makes this dynamic potentially even worse is that according to Caesar, he doesn't actually know how much money he will have sent to Cherry in total as part of this arrangement, because in his words, it was Cherry who managed all of these finances and had the spreadsheets and looked after those numbers. And when he left Brandoville a few years later, I asked him, well, what happened to those funds?
She didn't give me back, so like I think she stole it or something like this, but she didn't give me back.
Caesar told me that if he were to hazard a guess, he likely gave Cherry somewhere in the region of 5 million Indonesian rupiah as part of this arrangement. That works out at just over a month's full pay. On top of this, when it seemed like Caesar was going to resign from the company in 2021, he claims that Cherry told him, in fact, he owed the company over 200 million Indonesian rupiah, several multiples of his total annual salary. As you can see in this invoice that he provided us with, part of this is due to a Unity certification test that he'd taken, and then this gigantic chunk at the top here was for a training program he claims to have not even started yet, which would have seen him become an instructor at the yet-to-be-built Brandoville Academy, a school for new artists in Indonesia headed up by Ken Lai. Caesar was eventually fired from Brandoville Studios a few months later, but not before he claims to have paid back 7 million Indonesian rupiah, leaving just 20% of his paycheck intact each month. Christa's personal finances were also tangled up with Cherry's own as well. In the final months of Brandoville Studios, before it would declare bankruptcy, Christa was, on paper at least, being paid a decent salary.
Basically, she told the finance that my salary was 18.5 million. But then she told me that was actually her money. And she's basically just using, basically kind of putting it temporarily in my account. So I was not in the right state of mind to think that that is anything suspicious, because she didn't give me space to think, because first of all, severe sleep deprivation. Second of all, she sent me a message almost every hour, so I had to I didn't have time to think of anything else rather than respond or work.
Christa has shared WhatsApp messages with People Like Games dating from April to June of 2024, in which she can be seen informing Cherry on multiple occasions how much she's received that month from her salary, and then Cherry appears to dictate what she then needs to do with it.
So each month I was only supposed to keep 1.5 million, and then the rest 17 million I need to withdraw, exchange to Hong Kong dollars, and then pass it to her. Or I have to buy her stuff, a lot of expensive clothes and expensive items.
Doesn't sound great, does it? Sounds a bit fraudy, actually. But hey, if you're wondering what Cherry makes of these allegations, what her response to that might be, as well as everything else in this video, we have actually had a small amount of communication with her, and it was weird, and I'm going to tell you about that later on in this video. But needless to say, she did not respond to this specific allegation. Now, there's one more story I want to tell you about before we get to how all of this came to an end. It's from a woman that you've not heard from yet. Her name is Syifa Afiati, or Syifa for short, and she was for a time the business development manager at Brandoville Studios. While working at Brandoville in late 2022, Syifa became pregnant with her second child. And this pregnancy, she told me, was really difficult to manage alongside her work life, which was extremely taxing, but also specifically because of the actions of Cherry Lai.
He didn't care if we're pregnant. If she asked us to go for a meeting with her after working hours, we need to attend. And again, when I was pregnant, sometimes I had a meeting with her until 1 a.m. in the morning and until 3 a.m. in the morning. It was quite intense.
In early 2023, while in her second trimester, Syifa began to hemorrhage. She was rushed to hospital, where she was informed by the medical team there that she needed to stay at the hospital and get as much bed rest as possible. At the same time, Syifa tells me there was an issue involving a project that she'd been managing at work, and while in hospital, she was contacted by Brandoville employees, first asking her to come into the office for a meeting, and then later asking if she could work remotely from her hospital bed, answering emails and responding to clients. She declined both options and eventually even asked to resign from the company altogether in order to just focus on her own health and the health of her unborn child.
At the time, Cherry Lai was the one who contacting me. He said that he was really mad because I'm resigning, and she even blamed at my husband. Is it your husband again? You abandon your future, your dream job because of your husband again? She said, okay, just take a leave, but you cannot resign.
2 weeks later, Syifa gave birth to her second child, a little boy called Oslan. He was born more than 2 months prematurely and was immediately transferred to a neonatal intensive care unit. Over the coming weeks, Syifa would visit Oslan there each morning, with the hospital being relatively close to the Brandoville offices.
Sometimes if I have time after I visit my son, I come to Brandoville to chit-chat with Brandoville colleagues, just to have someone to talk with. And Cherry Lai noticed about that I already chit-chat with my friend, and she asked me if I can start to work. You know, in Indonesia, the maternity leave is 3 months. It was only 1 month after I gave birth.
Syifa agreed to do this, although on 2 conditions, the first of which was that she could visit her son still in hospital, and the second was that her workload would need to be much more manageable given the intense pressure she was now under. Syifa claims this did not end up being the case, and her work life remained very stressful, and she recalls visiting her son in intensive care unit and needing to step out of the room on multiple occasions to take calls about work at Brandoville from Cherry Lai. 4 months after being born and still in intensive care, Ozlan unfortunately died.
I remember my son passed away on September 28, 2023. At that time, I also had like quite important meeting with a client at 7 a.m. and he passed away like 11 p.m. before the meeting. And I think my mind was very get into the working. The first person I touched that time was my working groups, not my parents, but my working groups, because the next day I will have like quite important presentation. I told them, can you guys back up me, cover me for the presentation, because I need to attend my son's funeral. I need to taking care of that.
Syifa then took a few days of emergency leave from work, although it turned out she didn't go through the exact correct process in order to do this, a process that should have involved her asking Cherry Lai directly for permission. People Make Games has been provided with a screenshot of a message that Cherry Lai then sent to Brandoville's HR manager at the time, a woman called Alicia Sandra. And in this message, you can see her discussing what is happening with Syifa and what needs to be done next. I want to remind you here before I start reading it that this message was sent just 3 days after Ozlan had passed away. Of course, I understand her loved one passed away, but basic communication can't be avoided, and no way of any happened can have any exceptional to we need to do anyone a favourite. Sorry, it's written like this, you can sort of guess what she means. So just mark down in our records, and starting now, counted her as in leave. No way we pay for her currently sad mood or anything. This is so funny. I also have my dad passed away, or any kind of thing happened won't make things not function. This is really not normal to me. Anyways, I am just saying, to me, she's like a Natalia. That's referencing another employee at Brandoville who has children. And is that every woman will become one? So scary. Syifa had at that time taken 3 days off of work in order to grieve the death of her son and would return to work full-time the following week. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. Syifa, a few months later, resigned and would move with her family to Australia. Yeah. On August 8th, 2024, Brandoville Studios entered liquidation and was shut down. While most of its former employees waited for their severance to arrive and looked for work and opportunities elsewhere, a handful were convinced by Ken and Cherry to help them try and set up a new outsourcing company called Lai Lai Studios. Christa is keen for me to point out here that she didn't design the logo, which for some reason resembles a toilet. The group spent a few weeks holed up at the St. Regis Hotel in Jakarta, where they would try to figure out how to pivot to this new company and how also to attract investment. These would be the last weeks that Christa would spend with Cherry Lai, and they would also be some of the most violent. Christa recalls one moment in which she and another woman, Alicia, the former HR manager you just heard about, the two of them were approaching the hotel room of Cherry Lai.
So she opened her hotel room. I stood in front of it. She she hit my head until my glasses fell off. She stomped on my glasses until it broke. And then she slapped me a couple of times. She pushed me against the wall, and then she poured water on me. And then told me to clean up the mess.
This incident has been corroborated to People Make Games by Alicia Sandra, and she also confirms what Christa believes to be the reason for this attack, which is that the two of them had left supplies for Ken and Cherry next to their hotel room door rather than hung on the door handle of the room itself. 2 days prior to this, Christa, Cherry and several other colleagues attended a meeting at the KYK building in Jakarta, where upon arrival and after realizing that a document hadn't been printed off, which Cherry had requested, Cherry slapped Christa several times, punched her in the chest, grabbed her around the throat, and then kicked her before leaving for the meeting that was happening upstairs. The following month, with Brandoville Studios now having officially closed for good and those few people still orbiting Ken and Cherry having now drifted away even more so, Christa tells me that it was once again at the St. Regis Hotel, this time she's waiting for Cherry late at night, that she finally realizes this woman's power over her is no longer real.
So St. Regis is like really cold. Like inside the hotel is like so cold. It felt like it was winter over there. And I had been like standing by like since morning until like nighttime. So it was like, I was so cold. She didn't let me eat until like it was like late at night, and she didn't let me to like properly cover myself up with like a blanket. So she was taunting me. She was like challenging me basically. I thought to myself like, Shorty doesn't have like anyone else. Like I was like quite literally like the only person left with her. And she's still doing this to me.
Christa claims that Cherry had sent her out with her ATM cards in order to check the account balances ahead of the next day, and upon her arrival back at the hotel where she was expecting to meet Cherry, she found that Cherry had in fact returned to her hotel room. Now Christa knew the drill at this point. She would usually be expected to either message Cherry, call her, maybe knock on her hotel room door. She would not be able to leave without Cherry's permission.
But this time around, like I was like, you know what, I'm so tired, it's like 2 a.m. I should order like a cab home. And then when she realized that I wasn't going back to her, she panicked.
She tells me there were messages, phone calls, and threats, but she didn't go back. Instead, with the help of her mum and her brother, Christa began the work of compiling evidence to show what had happened to her and her colleagues over the last few years. Because here's the thing about bombarding someone with abuse over the course of years, and in Christa's own words, almost every hour, when this time comes, those messages exist, and Christa and her colleagues are going to have just so many receipts to work with. Indonesians have a phrase that's popular right now as trust in the country's police force and justice system are especially low. It's just 4 short words, and here they are.
No viral, no justice.
It means that if you want the authorities to take your story seriously and act upon it, if you want justice, you need that story to blow up on social media and force them to get involved. And in Indonesia, at least, that's exactly what happened with the Brandoville allegations. They went viral. And in turn, the Indonesian police has now begun interviewing witnesses, collecting evidence, and according to the Jakarta Globe, is looking to bring Cherry Lai in for questioning, although that is going to prove difficult for them because I believe Cherry Lai is no longer in Indonesia. I think she's in Hong Kong. And the reason I think that is because, well, she told me. I emailed Cherry in November about the allegations you've now heard in this video, offering her and Ken the opportunity to answer the many questions we had to ask them. She replied and started off by thanking me for the reporting I'd done on the crunch conditions at her studio in 2021, which was unexpected, before going on to say, and I quote, "To me, my part of the story is not important, as long as my team are good and safe now. However, I will love to meet a new friend if you can make it to Hong Kong." I told Cherry that I'd be happy to travel to Hong Kong in order to speak to her, but that any conversation we had would need to be both on the record and on camera, and at this point she seemingly changed her mind and shortly stopped replying to my emails. As for Ken Lai, well, he never replied to begin with or answered my calls, and he remains a mystery to me, honestly, here. I'm not exactly sure how we're meant to feel about his role in all of this. The employees I've spoken to are somewhat split on his culpability. Some make the very persuasive argument that he is, as one source put it to me, Cherry Lai's biggest enabler. As a husband and as the CEO of Brandoville Studios, he should have known what was going on, he should have done more to stop it, he should have protected the people that he was responsible for. That incident at the KYK building I mentioned just a few minutes ago, in which we're told that Cherry slapped Christa several times, put a hand around her throat, hit her in the chest and kicked her, well, one of the witnesses who saw that happen told me that this took place in the building's lobby, and when it happened, Ken Lai was in that same lobby, elsewhere in the room but in the same lobby, and appeared to act as if nothing had happened. But what confuses things for me is that there are others, including Christa, who believe that Kenlai may be another victim of Cherry's abuse, and that his silence comes from a place of fear. I don't know if that's true. I just don't really know enough about Kenlai altogether. And when I mentioned that to a former Brandoville employee a few days ago on a call, they replied, nobody does. As for Christa's future, I asked her what she intends to do next, now that all of this has finally gone public.
Personally, I'm hoping to recover mentally and physically. So I'm under like some treatments at the moment, and then hopefully like I can get back on my feet if things go well. Planning to study law, like want to be able to help like other artists like in the future, like for them to have like a better working environment than I did.
Christa told me that Indonesia is in desperate need of improved labour laws which can better protect its workforce from exploitation across pretty much every level, and that she hopes to, in some small way, contribute to that change going forwards, which is just a remarkable place for her to have ended up after all that she's been through. So huge shout out to Christa there. Now I do want to end this video by also just talking about the reason Christa and some of her co-workers agreed to be interviewed by me again this time around, because I really think that is the elephant in the room when it comes to this story. Now, this concept of no viral, no justice is certainly part of it, but there's something else going on as well. The video games industry as we know it today would look completely, utterly different without outsourced labour. Seriously, if you pick almost any AAA game at random from your collection and properly read through its credits, you're going to start to get some idea of the sheer scale at which this medium has relied on outsourcing for things like the creation of art assets, animation, audio work, localization, and QA. That's assuming the game you've picked has properly credited all of the people involved in its creation, which is not exactly a given, but you get my point. However, these Brandoville employees want you, our audience, to hear about their story because outside of their home country, they're not being treated as this crucial linchpin of the video game making process. If they had been, you probably would have heard about these terrible things that have happened to them already. And the reason you haven't is because outsourcing, particularly when it comes to lower income countries, is a topic that people living in the global north don't feel very comfortable talking about. And that discomfort has led to, in my opinion, one of the very worst abuses of power I've ever come across in this industry being largely missed or perhaps even ignored by people who don't live in Indonesia. It's barely been covered in the press, it's not being called out by the game studios who've relied on Brandoville's work up until now, and it has started no wider conversation outside of Southeast Asia about the working conditions of outsourced labour in the video games industry. Why is that, do you think? What makes Christa Sydney and her co-workers any less important than game developers based elsewhere in the world? There's likely many answers to that question, but none of them are good. If this video does end up reaching a wider audience and brings these stories to people living in the UK, in Europe, in the US, the global north, I hope it does prompt some conversation, some proper conversation on that front, at least. I'd like to offer a huge heartfelt thank you to everyone who spoke to People Make Games for this piece. I think it requires a very special kind of courage to take these kinds of experiences public and be this vulnerable about something so awful, and I hope you feel that we did those experiences justice. If you're watching this video and feel that this kind of games journalism is important to you and that we're offering something you're not getting enough of elsewhere, then please do consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/People Make Games. There's just no way we could have taken a swing at an investigation like this without the direct backing of our audience. We've been working on this one since September, and it's required just so much time in terms of tracking down the right people to interview, sorting through a mountain of screenshots and evidence, and corroborating the stories that you've now heard in order to be able to publish them today. To be pretty blunt with you here, we make very, very little money from YouTube advertisements, certainly not enough to run a channel like this. We've not sold a portion of this video to a sponsor. It would not have felt right in this context, I don't think, certainly. And yeah, we're not beholden to or supported by a giant corporation either. It's just us. We're a small team that try to tackle big stories, and we get to do that because of you. So yeah, final plug. If you want to help us take on more investigative work like this in the future, head over to patreon.com/People Make Games. That's it. Thank you so much for watching. I know it's a long video, I know it's a hard topic, but I really do think there's value in a lot more people knowing about this. So yeah, thank you for watching and we'll see you next time.